Today we are going to be educated on the deep, yucky things that happen in crawl spaces by Marty Sadler, who has been with Sawyer Exterminating for 5 years and is one of our newest business partners, which we really, really appreciate. I want to thank all of you for giving me a reason to get up and wash my hair for the first time in a week. So that's much appreciated. We're going to cover just a couple housekeeping things. First and foremost, go ahead and everybody's going to be on mute throughout this call except for me and Marty. And then you can see Cub's lovely glamour shot, and he'll come in and out if we need him for technical support. So you're only going to see us. You're not going to see every other participant. We're going to ask that you use the chat feature down in the bottom right-hand corner. The way we've decided to do this to keep this flowing is that Marty will talk about a series of points, and then we will take a break and address any questions. So as your questions are coming up, if you're anything like me, go ahead and put it in the chat feature, because in 5 minutes from now, you probably will have forgotten your question. And then we will go back and review those with Marty when we take these breaks. If you have a technical issue, please go ahead and put that in the chat feature too, because Cub's going to be monitoring that, as well as Ashley, and we'll try to assist you the best way that we know how. And so with no further ado, thank you, Marty, and go.
Well, thank you, Erin. I will now do this, attempt to share my screen, and then bring up, here we go. And I got to move this out of the way, so give me just a second here. Hang on a second. Here we go. And slideshow. How about that?
You're a whiz. Well done.
There we go. Okay, now, all right. Well, thank you all. I'm excited to do this. I've done a few Zoom presentations, and this will be obviously one of the larger ones I've done here. Yes, as Erin said, my name is Marty Sadler. I'm with Sawyer Exterminating. We're from Burlington. We are excited. We have done a lot of work in the Orange County, Chatham County area for a number of years. We are now official. We have recently joined the association, and was so looking forward to seeing everyone and meeting more folks. And then the world kind of changed there a little bit, but that's okay. We will get through this. We do termite work, termite control, pest control, crawlspace moisture control. We even do wildlife removal. We even install gutter guards to all help with basically the theme that we're trying to do is keep our homes as free from pests as we can too. So what I'm going to do today is take about 20 minutes or so, when we will have a couple breaks for questions, and talk about the history of the crawl space. Crawl spaces weren't always moisture issues like they are today. And then the other thing to do is my goal is to give you information as agents to say, now that we know what crawl space moisture, what it is made up of, where it comes from, but let's be honest, 95% of home inspections have something about the crawl space mentioned about that. And so to give you enough information that says, well, that doesn't look quite right, or where's your supporting evidence? I will try not to throw all home inspectors under the bus. There are some good ones out there. And your goal today is to try to stay awake, because we are talking about the crawl space. So let's begin here. So here is a cross section of a crawl space circa 1960, which, just a little side note, that was a banner year. 1960 was a great year because someone on this presentation just got some more discounts, and he can go into shopping areas about an hour earlier than some folks now. So anyway, but you see the cross section here. We have the interior of the home, and then we have the subflooring here. And then we have the ventilation, then we have the crawl space. Not a lot happening here, but down here it says the ground temperature was always colder than the enclosed interior. Let's dive down in that a little bit. Heat is transferred three ways. This is conduction that happens in the crawl space, and you have convection, you have radiation. So that means that the inside of a home, if it's 75 degrees inside of a home, by the time that heat transfers all the way down, it's about 67 or 68 degrees on the joist of the crawl space. Again, it's getting heat from the inside of the home all the way down to 67, 68 degrees, but you see the ground temperature is 60 degrees. Pretty significant difference between 68 degrees and 60 degrees. So what does that really mean? Is that we do live in the hot, humid South. When humidity enters a structure such as the crawl space, it's looking to condensate. Condensation always happens at dew point, or the coldest area, which used to be the ground. Let's get into a little more about dew point here. Here's the definition of dew point. Dew point is the temperature to which water vapor, let me do something here. I'm trying to move so I can see things a little better. Here we go. Okay, which water vapor must be cooled to become saturated water vapor. When further cooled, the airborne water vapor will condense to form liquid water. When air cools to its dew point through contact with the surface that is colder in air, water will condensate on the surface. So dew point is where this air vapor condensates into water. And dew point used to be the ground of a crawl space. But something happened in the 70s that changed that. And those of us who remember the 70s, we had some really good things that happened in the 70s. We had some really ugly things that happened in the 70s, and we then had some bad things that happened to crawl space in the 70s. So let's start with the good things. What were the good things that happened in the 70s? Okay, my personal opinion, but to me, the 70s was the best decade for classic rock and roll that some of us still listen to today. Motown, I'll give you the 60s, but for me, the best decade for rock and roll music were the 70s. What was the ugly thing that happened in the 70s? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you men's fashion, AKA the leisure suit. And I just love this picture here, because look how the belt matches the shirt. Look at the size of that lapel and the cuffs. What I really love is this guy's expression. He is so confident. He looks really good in this leisure suit of the 70s. Normally I ask for a show of hands, which I can't do right now, obviously, but I will guarantee you that at least one person on this presentation had a leisure suit, and that she
I'm
is
100% sure it was Cub.
well, I'm not saying that, but I will tell you that one person is really glad that there is no photographic evidence that he is aware of that it was his leisure suit owner, because it was bright yellow. Oh my goodness. Well, what was the bad thing that happened to crawl spaces? It's one of those unintended consequences, but we had the OPEC oil embargo, and this is what most people remember about that, is that you had gas lines. Gasoline was more expensive, and the people ran out of gas. You had the odd days and even days, but basically the cost of energy went up for the first time really in history. The cost of heating a home went up for the first time. And so what do? We insulated everything, including the crawl space. So what did insulation do in and of itself to a crawl space? So here we go back to that cross section. Again, inside temperature is 75 degrees. We now have the insulation, the fiberglass insulation here, but if you look, as this heat gets transferred now, it gets cut off by this insulation, and the temperature in the wood now that nearest the floor is at 61 or 62 degrees, very close to dew point. Also, the insulation is at 61 or 62 degrees. Again, the same as dew point, and you see in here it says water droplets are occurring on the insulation. Fiberglass insulation will hold water, and will hold that water all year long up against the wood. And then something else happened in the 70s to most homes, and that we in the hot, humid South are so glad of, when we thank the good Lord for every summer, is that we started installing central air conditioning. Great, but guess what? Those ducts are cold. So as this humidity comes into the crawl spaces every summer, and no longer collects on the ground, it collects around the air conditioning ducts, it collects in the fiberglass insulation, and it collects on the wood. It collects a little more every year. The trend line goes up and up and up every year, but usually after about 20 years or so of absorbing all this moisture every year, you get a crawl space that looks something like this. And I call this the Linville cavern effects. All this insulation has become saturated and is heavy and is falling due to just being saturated with moisture. The wood, it's hard to see here, but the wood is actually wet. There's actually a film of water on that wood, and there's even standing water in this crawl space. It's literally raining in this crawl space. And the reason it's doing that is, again, we changed the dew point of a crawl space in the 70s. So no longer the ground, it's the air conditioning lines, and it's the insulation up here where all this moisture collects. So let's stop right quick. And does anyone have any questions?
So far, we do not.
Okay.
I think you can keep going, but if we get them, we'll address them to at the next break.
Sure. Okay. So let's go ahead. So this is a moisture meter. Good home inspectors use moisture meters. Now, wood moisture in a ventilated crawl space will fluctuate during the year. It's higher in July and lower in January, as our atmosphere has more humidity in July than in January. But this moisture meter is reading 90%. That seems a little high, but let's go to the experts. This is from NC State. We in the pest control business, we deal with wood destroying fungus because fungus is a pest. Pests aren't always just insects. This says fungi will only decay wood with a moisture content above fiber saturation point, which is 30% by weight for most species used in construction. Wood with a moisture content of 20% and above is susceptible to decay. If the moisture meter reads below 20%, the wood is unlikely to decay. A moisture meter reading of 20 to 24% is in the caution zone. Look for sources of the excess moisture and correct the problems. If the moisture meter reads 25 to 30%, decay and damage will most likely be present. Excuse me. Look for sources of excess moisture, correct problems, and replace decayed wood. So again, under 20%, the wood is unlikely to decay. Over 20%, it can decay. Over 25% is most likely starting to decay. And obviously, y'all do a lot with wood destroying insect reports. You do know that wood moisture over 20% is also a conducive condition for termites. Again, brown rot and white rot, and this stuff is deadly for wood. To me, it's worse than termites. It says these fungi will actually cause structural damage to wood. They often produce a white, cottony growth on the surface of the wood. Brown rot is one of the most common types of wood-destroying fungi. As the wood decays, it darkens, shrinks, twists, and cracks form across the grain of the wood. Finally, the wood becomes dry and powdery. Wood decay by white rot fungi has a bleached appearance and is fibrous and soft, sponge-like. Wood that is saturated in water, again, 30% moisture readings, will rot. If the wood drops below 20%, these fungi will not grow. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but on the bottom here it says, fungi may continue to grow as the wood dries down to a moisture content of approximately 24%, but will cease if the wood is kept below 20%. This is a picture of white rot in the crawl space. Again, you see the insulation has fallen. I know it's hard to see in this photograph, but white rot has, I call it body to it. It looks like if you flatten a cotton ball up against the wood. There's other fungi that can occur in a crawl space. It can be on the surface of the wood. It can be gray in appearance. There's multiple fungi that can happen in a crawl space. NC State calls this surface growth. It does not damage the wood, so to speak, but it can be gray in color, but there's no body to it. Here, a quick war story is that I did have a seller of a home, a very nice home, probably a $500,000 home, call me in tears one day and says, I've got a major issue and I'm moving out today. The moving van was literally in the driveway. We had done some pest control work, but nothing mentioned about issues in moisture in the crawl space. So went over there, saw the home inspection report. The home inspector didn't say if, and, or but. It said white rot in the crawl space. So I said, let me go check it out. But I also noticed in the inspection report, there was no pictures, no evidence of it. I went down and looked. She did have some surface growth in a few areas, but the wood moisture reading was not high enough to sustain white rot, nor was there any body to that fungal growth. It was just surface growth. But another company had already come in there and quoted $14,000 worth of remediation work for a problem that didn't exist. And of course, that's what the buyer wanted, and I can kind of understand that. But again, always ask for evidence. This is another picture of white rot. And what's interesting about this picture is you see there was no insulation in the home. It was an older home. So insulation is not the culprit always. But again, this house, Unfortunately, the lady who lived there was using plywood inside the home because the floors in her kitchen were so soft, she was afraid she was going to fall through the floor. And she was about ready to. I mean, basically, her whole floor system had to be replaced. This is brown rot. Now, you can have fungal growth on the surface of the wood that is dark in color, but it's not necessarily brown rot. To really know it's a brown rot, you've got to basically break open that piece of wood, which is not hard to do if a wood has been attacked by brown rot. And you see how they have this formed little rectangles. That is the evidence of brown rot. And if you see on this, is actually the surface is white, but that is brown rot. And these fungi will take the strength out of wood very quickly. They make really good tool holders, but they really can. I mean, you'll have to start replacing joists if you let brown rot or white rot set into a crawl space. Okay, I got a question that anyone can answer if you can, or through chat or whatever, want to do this, but anyone wants to tell me what kind of growth this is?
No, but that's what we see all the time.
Okay. Well, it's a trick question because that is not fungal growth. That's actually residue from camel crickets or cave crickets. And here's a picture of, it's hard to see because I blew it up. This is a camel cricket. These are camel crickets, and they love to leave their little residue all over these little black dots. But I did have a home inspection report, and the the home inspector said black mold. And you talk about killing a cell. You just say the word black mold, and it's like, okay. And he said how he tested for black mold is he took his gloved finger and ran across this surface, and it smeared. And fungus will smear, and camel cricket feces will not smear. I'm not a microbiologist, but I remember enough about biology in the 8th grade, so that's not how you test for mold. And this picture actually came from NC State. This is not my picture. This is something NC State has on their website about camel cricket residue, but you see that a lot. They love the moisture in the wood, and they'll leave their little residue all over the place. Okay, got a pop quiz here. Y'all didn't realize you have a pop quiz here, but we now know where crawlspace moisture comes from. We know it takes a little bit of time for it to develop, and it has to be at least 30% wood moisture. So here's a home. It's got 40% wood moisture content. It's in the danger zone. And if you look at this picture here, you see some surface growth, but you see the white that's developing here, the white body. That's actually start of white rot. And no, it's very difficult to see here, but in this insulation, there's beads of condensation. This insulation is just saturated with condensation. So my question is, does anybody want to guess how old this house was?
Let's give them a minute.
I will.
All right, somebody take a guess. All right, Tim Ferguson says a year.
A year? Okay, it's not bad.
Susie Shackman says it's brand new. Craig
says
5 years.
5 years. Y'all are better. I've had other people say, well, it's got to be about 20 years old. This is the house. It was 3 years old when we discovered the issue. What caused this nice, I mean, it's a well-built house. I actually know the builder. This is close to the office here in Burlington. Well-built home. And you talk about a difficult conversation to have with a homeowner. Your nice new home here is starting to have rot in its crawl space. What caused this? When they built the house, they put this deck on, beautiful deck. This is actually made with Trex, so it's not wood. It's that wood, or almost like a
composite.
Yeah, exactly. It's very nice. It's actually underpinned here. The owner's a little elderly, and she didn't want anything getting under her deck. But it's also on the south side of the house. And when I was there that day, I could not even put my hand on the deck. It was that hot. So you have superheated air coming in, and there are foundation vents underneath this deck. And so superheated air comes in and condensates all along around the air conditioning ducts and the insulation in the crawl space, and all along her back wall, she was developing white rot. And we had to correct that issue. This is something you can, if a house is being sold or being bought, you can look wherever you see an attached deck or patio. And I'm not talking about a deck that's 10 feet off the ground, but if it's close to the ground, just understand it may have an issue with crawl space moisture in that area due to that issue. We'll stop here again. Any questions now?
So we have a question from Tim Ferguson that probably was related a little bit more to the first part.
Sure.
Is the humidity higher in the house than the usual surrounding air?
Not necessarily. The air conditioning of the home is also a dehumidification part of the home. If you know, around your air conditioning, if it's outside, you'll have a pipe and you'll have water coming out, condensate coming out. What's happening in that in the air conditioning units of all of our homes is that you're actually dehumidifying the inside. So usually the home will be less humid than the outside.
And then I had a question related to what was the solution to the last house that you showed? Was part of the problem that she had done the underpinning? I mean, what were the solutions for that?
Basically, we removed, we had to remove the insulation because it was saturated. And even 3 years, it was already saturated. We washed off, whenever we see white rot, you got to get rid of that quickly. We wash it off, and not just, basically the standard treatment is to wash it off or sodium, which is drainage. But then we basically condition the crawl space. I'll get to that in a little bit. You got to lower that ambient humidity. The culprit is the hot, humid air, and you got to lower that ambient humidity to a point where nothing will grow for that.
And you cut out for a little section of that, you lagged. So what was the main, I mean, you washed it off, but what was the main solution to not having the problem continue?
Yes, we had to condition the crawl space, keep that hot, humid air out, and lower the ambient humidity in that crawl space.
And then I don't know if I was going back to the camel crickets. I told you before we started, that's why I don't like to go into crawl spaces, because it's not the snakes, it's the camel crickets that freak me out. But when we see that, and we see that often, is the only way to discern that it's that versus some sort of mold growth by having a mold test? Or is there a way for us to be able to at least on the surface say,
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's a visual. We're not mold remediators nor mold testers, but it's a visual. Any little black specks, it's cricket residue. Fungi does not develop the black specks. There's other things, you've seen pictures of it. It can have a gray, surface or brown, or fungus is different than camel cricket residue, and it's just a testing concern. And we can do to look at wood moisture. Yes, if we were expecting a house in January with vents, it's going to be lower than July. But also look for their evidence for that. Crickets normally like if there's an open patio or open porch to an area, to the crawl space, that's where they seem to come in through. And you'll see them, sometimes they're throughout, but they'll be on 2 or 3 of the joists.
We're noticing too, you got, Tim is saying that you froze, but you're not frozen on my screen. Is anyone else experiencing, is it back to normal for most of you? Anyone feel free to type in and say normal for me. Okay. All right, Tim, let me know if you still have problems. Just put it up in there. Okay.
Yeah, no,
okay.
We'll have time to recap everything if you have any other questions, or if I for some reason froze up during this.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's move forward a little bit more. So, how dry should wood be? And this comes from Building Science Corporation. If you see, it says normal is 7 to 12%, 14, 16, and over 20 is high, which is agree. And if you see down here, it says a moisture content of 16% is well recognized for the limit of surface mold. So keep wood moisture under 16%, and you won't even allow surface mold to occur. How dry does that ambient humidity need to be? We won't pay, the top part deals with water activity, won't worry about this, but here is something that gives you the wood moisture content and the ambient humidity in the crawl space. So 70% will equate to a wood moisture content of 16%. We like to see wood moisture at 12 to 14%, which is basically 50 to 60% relative humidity. You achieve that by conditioning the crawl space in a few ways, which we'll get to in a little bit. I think it's interesting, 20% demarcation for danger in the crawl space, so to speak, that's 80% relative humidity. Crawl spaces can be cool in the summer, but they're also very humid, surprisingly humid. Here's the other thing about that. You see this is active fungal growth of the wood moisture. Here's another picture of fungus that is fungus growth that's active does have airborne particles, basically spores that get into the air. Unfortunately, they do not stay in the crawl space. Something that's called the stack effect, which many of you may have seen. Whether it's your basement or your crawl space, it is cool down here, and as air rises, air warms, it rises. And then also pressure changes inside a home. If you open up a door or a window, pressure changes, and you pull air from the crawl space into the indoor air, which can affect the quality of indoor air. Certain studies will say up to 30% of the indoor air comes from the crawl space. Others say, 60%. Can affect the indoor air. So much so that even the EPA came out with guidelines called EPA Indoor Air Plus. Basically, these are guidelines for building homes, but this is if you're concerned about indoor air quality. The whole document talks about the different things from what paints to use, what fabrics to use. But for those of us in hot, humid air, it does say seal crawl spaces and basement perimeter walls to prevent outside air infiltration and provide conditioned air at a rate not less than 1 cubic feet per 50 square feet of horizontal floor area. And another thing the report says here is that for us in the hot, humid South, basement crawl space is insulated, sealed, and conditioned, except in flood zones for here. So what that means is we talk about sealing up the crawl space. This is a before picture. And what I want to tell you is that you seal up the crawl space from the inside, you don't close the vents. Here's a picture of the crawl space. Here is a vent well, and we go from the inside with basically it's called foam board. It's 2.5 inches thick, and we foam around it. The goal is to keep that hot, humid air and the cold air out of the crawl space. They did have some moisture issues years ago. A contractor went in there and put a dehumidifier in. It wasn't built for the crawl space, number one, but they left the vents open. So they were trying to dehumidify their entire neighborhood. Well, that could be one reason that the dehumidifier doesn't work anymore.
Marty, I'm going to stop you just for a second because we're getting a lot of breakup on your end. I don't know if that's if your connection's going in and out or.
Let me see. It seems like I have good
connection.
Connection on my phone. Okay. Do I need to come back?
Let's go for another couple minutes and then maybe because we're missing some chunks.
Okay.
Good info.
Sure. Okay. Well, this is a conditioned crawl space, and this is my term, our terms here, that you see there's no insulation in the subfloor, it's been removed, no insulation on the wall, but we do put a dehumidifier and obviously a good vapor barrier here. This is the fully encapsulated crawl space, which is the better option, the best option, because there is insulation. It's not in the subflooring. There is foam board insulation on the perimeter walls of the crawl space. Good, obviously thicker 12 mil vapor barrier dehumidifier. And on a personal note, my mom had breathing issues most of her adult life. It wasn't asthma, it was allergies, sinus. She was at the ear, nose, and throat doctor about every other month. I grew up in a basement home, which is fun to play in, but it's musty. My dad built a house for them after we all moved out, obviously. And that crawl space has no vents in it because they put conditioned air in that crawl space from when it was built so that no fungal growth will occur and keep the indoor air of their home as high as it can be. But what we want to do is don't let it become, crawl space become this, because obviously as realtors, if you have a client that is selling or buying a house and the crawl space looks like this, there could be some major issues and major costs to repair this. One quick final thing here. I inspected a house years ago. Older homes, as you can tell, no insulation, thicker cut wood. So it's not a perfect scientific experiment, but you see the wood moisture, green is good. So it was good wood moisture in the main part of the crawl space. Right behind this, in this area right here, they added a laundry room about 12 years earlier. In that laundry room, they put insulation. Here's what the wood moisture reading is in that laundry room. It went to the caution area in my wood moisture readings just because all that humidity was collecting up in the insulation, not like on the ground in their main crawl spaces. So I thought it was good to have some validations. So that's my presentation. So Aaron, I will go back. If I need to go back and repeat anything since I was kind of breaking up a little bit, you let me know, or any questions.
Give me a second. I'll see if people, um, see if anybody has any questions. I know when, so got a question from Janice that says the relationship better, I guess, to try to better understand the relationship to insulation and humidity.
Okay, yeah. The humidity collects in the insulation now over a period of time. Fiberglass insulation does absorb moisture. And so what happens is you can just see in the pictures we remind, it all starts to get heavy and it will hold. The danger really is the fact that crawl spaces is ventilated, the hot humid air comes in the summer, but then the cooler air can come in, cooler dry air come in the wintertime. Once that insulation becomes saturated, that wood doesn't have a chance to dry out in the winter. It's holding the moisture against that wood all year long. So that's what happens. That's why the insulation, once it's saturated, becomes an issue.
Okay, and another question, and this was one of mine too, recommendations for keeping foundation vents open and closed when it's non-encapsulated.
Yes, everyone has that question. It goes back and forth because when I was growing up, you open them in the fall, open them in the spring, close them in the fall, you put a little plastic on the ground, you're good to go. If I was to choose one or the other, believe it or not, I would probably just leave them open. Yes, you're letting the hot, humid air in, but what really helps is we do let the drier air in too. But if you can't do encap or any type of, it's almost you close them during the summer and you open them during the fall and winter. We don't get that cold in the wintertime anymore. If you get down to around 0 degrees, you certainly want to close up those vents, but we just don't get that cold anymore. But if I were to choose one or the other, I'd probably leave them open.
So you do not necessarily follow the sort of close them in the summer, open in the winter.
If that would be the better option. If you wanted one choice, people ask me, well, would you just leave them open or close them? If you have one or the other, I would open them, but I would close them in summer and open them in the winter.
Okay.
Yep.
And then generally speaking, what's the cost to, I mean, I don't know, obviously it's going to depend on the size of the crawl space, but just so we can give a relative estimate, the cost to encapsulate and condition a space.
Yeah, that's a good question. For the fully encapsulated with the foam board on the wall and everything, I call that the Cadillac. I mean, you're looking somewhere in that $6 per square foot range ish. A lot depends on how user friendly the crawl space is.
Meaning you can get in there.
Yes, exactly. A conditioned crawl space, a lot depends. When conditioned, and these are my terms now, is that you just remove the insulation, do not put it back, but you close it up the crawl space, put a good vapor barrier. Most of the time the vapor barrier needs to be replaced, put a dehumidifier in. That could be in that $3-ish range. So that kind of gives you, I mean, it's not, let's be honest, it's not inexpensive, but I mean, you start replacing floor joists after they rotted away, and you talk about really expensive.
And what's the benefit I mean, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this question. If we're going to go for the Cadillac version versus the thing that's a little bit more cost effective with the just, closing up the vent wells, vapor barrier, how much of a difference are you really going to get? Or does that depend on each house?
Yeah, it depends on the house by all means. I mean, if you have and that's the kind of debate in crawl space encapsulation is how much thermal transfer, hot, cold air is coming through the foundation wall. And we don't live in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We're in central, North Carolina, and that's the debate. So if in my opinion, if you're just buying the house, you're going to be there for 30 years, and you have a decent size, a 3-foot-ish, 4-foot crawl space, you may want to consider go ahead and fully encapsulating it. Yes, this is more expensive, but you'll get your return on investment by energy savings. I know y'all deal a lot with people selling a home, and if you're selling the home, and you want to, the seller obviously wants to spend the least amount of money as possible, probably look at conditioning the crawl space. Here's the thing too, I mean, what we do, nothing is ever speak now and forever hold your peace. These things can be done in increments. Let's say someone buys a house with a conditioned crawl space, there's no insulation there. There's nothing preventing them from putting foam board insulation in the future. That can be done, and we've done that before, where we kind of do part A for the seller and part B for the buyer in a year or two, and that's not a problem.
We have another question from Christy. Where did it go? Here we go. What are your thoughts on digging a trench around the foundation interior, an interior French drain, I guess, and installing pipes to give water a place to go and drain out, and adding a sump pump?
Yeah, and then we do that too, because there are certain areas, even where I grew up at, you have more, the ground has more moisture in it, and the technical term is called hydrostatic pressure. We've seen it before, where you can have water does not necessarily always come in through the foundation wall, but it kind of bubbles up. For those of us who remember the Beverly Hillbillies, just like Jed Clampett, bubbling crude, when kind of water kind of bubbles up from the ground and then will go back down. The pressure of that home is just forcing the water up into that. And we have done that before. We see evidence of standing water and along a foundation. We always try to put the sump pump in the lowest part, let Mother Nature gravity feed the water there. And then we may need some help along a foundation wall or so. We try not to go around the entire foundation if we don't need to. Again, every home is different for cost savings, but we've had evidence where we know we've got more than one area that where water is collecting. So what we'll do is we'll dig a trench from one area to get it to the sump pump.
So at what point do you recommend doing something like what Christy just asked about versus conditioning versus encapsulating?
And as far as sump pumps?
Yeah, I mean, at what point, when is that needed versus the other things? Is that when you're seeing standing groundwater?
Yes, when you see standing groundwater, I mean, yeah. And that's, I mean, you go in a crawl, and it's kind of funny. There's almost like little microclimates around every area, and certain areas are just wetter than others. The neighborhood I grew up in, there's a lot of sump pumps because that's a wetter area for whatever reason, for whatever geological reason. And if you see evidence of standing water, the dehumidifier is not going to stop that by any means. It's just coming up from the ground. So if there is recurring standing water that is coming up from the ground, and we can see it actually infiltrate through the foundation wall, especially something called a single brick foundation wall. If older homes, they just use one row of brick, it's not going to fall down, but there's mortar over the years allow moisture to seep through there. And you pretty much, there's no way to stop that. You have to put a pump in there. If you're looking at a home it's kind of sitting at the lowest part of the neighborhood, that may be a good candidate for a sump pump as well.
Okay, got another one here. Janice wants to know about the relationship with the foam board and termites. So I'm going to ask that, and you can address. Yeah. And then the second one is issues with radon if you completely condition a crawl space.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just tried to. Yeah, the foam board, and actually the technical name of the foam board is Bora foam board. It is infused with borate. Borate is a termiticide because those little critters will eat styrofoam. So there is the other thing that's interesting too. There are building codes. We follow those building code guidelines. You can build a house like my dad did with a conditioned crawl space, but you want to leave an inspection gap. You don't want that foam board to go all the way up to the wood, because what you're looking for is termite tubes. So by building code standards, you need to have an inspection gap so that you allow inspection for termites in that crawl space for that. I've seen some do-it-yourself jobs where they put foam board. The foam board's fine, but they put it all the way up to the wood, and we can't inspect it for any termites. We can't offer any type of termite warranty or termite for that. And then I'm sorry, what was the question?
The other one was about having a conditioned crawl space. Do you have raised concerns then about radon?
Radon, fortunately, in Central North Carolina, radon is not a major issue. There are radon fans that can be put underneath the vapor barrier, and what it does, it pulls. It's basically like you use in a French drain. You have a corrugated pipe, and it's be pulling air out from underneath there. So if there's a radon issue, you can still move that radon out of the crawl space for that.
Does encapsulating it though raise the chances of radon being?
Oh no, it does not.
Okay. Okay. I think that was.
Okay. Yeah, it does not include. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if there was, yeah, if you were in an area, and I think our mountains have more radon in that area, you would definitely probably want to do a radon test before doing
Oh, we
any.
do.
Yeah,
Real Estate Commission made that loud and clear to us in the last 2
there you
years.
go. Yeah, yeah.
And then I've got one more from Tim, and I think this goes back to the French drain question when we were talking about doing it interior if you've got standing water for the hydrostatic pressure. But he's asking French drain inside or outside of the foundation.
Yeah, good question. If you have water in the yard, standing water, we've seen it, it's always good to keep water away from the foundation wall, and so that's not a bad thing at all. It's not going to guarantee that you keep water out of the crawl space by just having it on the exterior beginning, because water doesn't always just flow from the outside to the inside of the crawl space. It can happen, but it doesn't always happen. More likely, it's just coming up right in the middle of the crawl space as well too. It all depends on just, you know, every crawl space is different, so you just have to look and just see what is happening there for that. If I were to build a home today, I would go ahead and put a drain on the outside of the crawl space, outside of the foundation wall, just to make sure that all this water that can pond up against the foundation wall is moved away.
Okay, and you got a very nice compliment. I'm not sure if you can see that, but Dan Cunningham met you and Tommy at Europe Center, and y'all have installed gutter guards, termites control, mosquitoes. Your workers were professional. The work was impeccable. So, it's a very nice compliment because we're a picky bunch.
Well, thank you.
Are there any other questions before we sign off? Hold on. We're getting some thank yous. I think you've answered our questions.
Well, you have all my contact information, that Cub does. So if you have any questions at all, you can contact the association. They can get in touch with me. I'll be happy to answer any questions, do anything we can for you.
And this was recorded, just so you all know. So if there's anything you need to go back or parts that sort of we know had some technical issues and you've got questions about it, just shoot Cub or Ashley an email and we can try to get in touch with Marty to get answers to those. And again, you'll be able to revisit this recording, I believe, on Monday. Cub, I don't know if your mic's on.
Nope, I think we're all good.
Okay. All right. Thank y'all so much for joining us today. We ended up with a lot of attendees, which was really great. And perhaps we will look to do more of these sans the COVID-19 virus as a future way to present good information. So thank you so much, Marty, for your time. Thanks to all of my wonderful colleagues. And thanks to Ashley and Cub for putting this together.
Thanks so much.
See you later.
Have a great day.